Well, welcome everybody. Thank you, Christina, for stepping in at the last minute. Karen's having some family emergencies going on, so Christina stepped in to do this call with us today, which I very much appreciate. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And like I was saying earlier, Triple Crown loves the polo cross folks. We really appreciate everything you guys do working with us, and we really enjoy fueling all these athletes. Um, so, we're going to talk about nutrition for sport horses this evening. I've got a slideshow that I'll move through. And then, if you have any questions, I guess you should be able to post them to the Zoom call, and Lisa will be able to see them. And maybe what we'll do is run through them at the end so that we've got plenty of time to address them all thoroughly. So don't hesitate, though, if you have a question, be sure and ask it because chances are, if you have the question, somebody else has the question. So you'll be doing them a big favor by asking. And I love answering questions anyways. So we'll get started here. I was telling Lisa when I was making this presentation this morning, I have tons of polo cross photos on my phone. So it made for making a pretty fun presentation. So you might see some familiar faces in there. All right, let's go back one. So I'll tell you a little bit about Triple Crown. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and then we'll get on to the real interesting stuff. But Triple Crown is a small family-owned company. Rob Doherty owns the company, and he has since it started. And we've grown from 3 employees to 42 employees. And we cover the whole country with just those 42 people. So the nice thing about it is we're a really tight-knit group. We all talk to each other. We all help each other. We all have, bring a lot to the table and all have different skill sets. So it's a really special place to work. And I always like to mention that because I think that that's really important, that everyone knows how much of a unicorn of a company it is and how everybody who works there, all they care about is horses. And we all just live, eat, sleep, and breathe horses all day, every day. So I do horses for work and horses for fun and horses at home and just all horses all the time. Um, Depending on what part of the country you're in, I might be your rep, or you might have one of my other really stellar folks who I work with, and any of us would be happy to help you either ourselves or put you in touch with whoever. I've got my contact in here at the beginning and then at the end, as well as Stacy, who mans the 800 number and the general info at Triple Crown email address. So the nice thing again about it being a small company is anytime you reach out to us, whether it's through social media or the 800 number or email, you talk to a real life person and they tend to be quite helpful. So take advantage of those resources. My name's Christina again, and I cover North and South Carolina for Triple Crown. And then because it's a small company, always other duties as assigned. So you may get to see me in other parts of the country. I have a couple horses. I have like the Island of Misfit toys. I have several different breeds and done a little bit of everything over the years. I've been blessed with some very nice horses that are willing to kind of do whatever I come up with in a given week. So the black horse there is Cricket, and she is a 20-year-old racking horse who has shown and done endurance and trail riding and all sorts of things. And then I don't know how many years ago it's been now, 5 or 7 years ago, I was like, oh, I'd like to try polo cross. And so she came with me to do polo cross, and she thought that was pretty great. And she's brought a couple young people along as well. And then right now, Jordana Hostler has her and is playing her. So we've gotten to spend some time with all the polo cross folks and really enjoy it. It's a really lovely community. So as we start talking about nutrition, let's start off with the basics. Um, I guess this is a little different than a regular in-person thing because I can't ask you questions and get answers, but play along with me and see if you can remember what the most important nutrient is. And then we're going to talk about forage as the base of the diet, filling in the forage gaps, and planning a diet for the horse specifically in front of you. So water is the most important nutrient. Horses can live weeks without food. They can live something like, I think it's it's almost, I don't know, almost 2 months without any food. Um, of course, they're probably going to have some other issues, but they can only live a few days without water. And it's good to remember that horses drink between 5 and 15 gallons per day, depending on the temperature outside, how much they're sweating, what kind of forage they're eating. Horses that eat grass get a significant amount of water through the grass that they're eating. Horses that are eating hay are going to need additional water so that they can digest the hay because the hay doesn't have the same water content as the grass. And all different things are going to affect horses' water intake. So whenever we're talking about keeping horses hydrated, it's super important. This is how you avoid like impaction colics. It's how you avoid tying up. It's how you avoid a lot of stress within the horse's body. And there's a bunch of different things you can do to help your horses, encourage your horses to drink enough water in a given day. Obviously, making sure that they have fresh, clean water at all times is important. Um, Choosing a drinking vessel that your horse likes is important. So some horses really prefer to drink out of, small buckets or large buckets or buckets that are near where they eat their food. So we can play with all different things to help encourage them to drink more water. Um, there was a study done with the endurance folks, and horses drink significantly more water when their eyes don't go below the top of the container. So if you think like a water trough out in the field, if the water level is high enough in the trough that their eyes stay above the edge, they're going to drink 10 to 15% more water than a horse who's got the water level lower and they have to stick their whole head in there. And that's probably something to do with the fact that horses are prey animals and they want to be able to scan the horizon to look for, predators and scary things. So that's something easy you can do with your horses when you're at home or when you're traveling to competitions. Make sure that their water is topped up so that they can see over the top of the bucket. Somebody did some research looking at colors of water buckets that horses prefer, and horses drink 10 to 15% more water with turquoise buckets. So that may be an easy thing to do the next time you're shopping for buckets because something's broken or you get a new horse. You may think about getting a turquoise bucket for them. Of course, if it matches your color scheme of all your other things. Um, Other things that are helpful for horses drinking, making sure that the horse can get to the water, whether physically they can get to the water. Is it a spot that they are able to get to? For your older horses, is it quite close to their usual areas that they hang out? So they're not having to walk way further. Maybe they've got some arthritis or some discomfort, but keeping the water close by where they like to hang out so it's really easy for them to drink. Another thing to consider is what the herd dynamics are like in the pasture. If you have a dominant horse, is it trying to keep the other horses away from the water tank? I had that situation when I had a horse visiting for an extended stay, and I had my thoroughbred mare would not let her near the water tank. And so I watched her guard it almost like she was cutting cattle, and she would keep this other mare away from the water tank. And finally, I, watched it for a while. I pulled her out to let the other horse get to the tank. And as soon as she got to the tank, um, the other horse proceeded to climb into the tank and splash in it. And my mare looked at me like, well, that's why I didn't let her at it. But that's something to consider if you've got a herd of horses and there's a pecking order within the herd. Is everybody in the pasture able to get to the water tank without being run off by whoever the boss is or whoever the bully is? Um, and then in the stalls, sometimes there's spots that they'll drink better out of. For a horse who's maybe a little worried and likes to look out the window, situating the bucket near the window can be helpful. For a horse who likes to dunk their hay in the water, having one bucket of water by its hay net so that it can dunk its hay, and then having a fresh water bucket somewhere else in the stall so that they'll drink out of it. If you have a horse who's really messy with their water and is constantly like taking up mouthfuls and dropping it out, it may be beneficial to hang two buckets or put like a muck tub or something in there so that the horse is not going to run out of water. So there's lots of stuff that goes along with water. Hydration is super important in horses. They dehydrate surprisingly easy considering, our desire for them to live. So anything you can do to keep your horse hydrated is going to be beneficial to everybody. So colic prevention, performance, all of that is all tied into it. Um, Trailering horses is stressful and they dehydrate surprisingly fast in the trailer. Even if you don't visibly see sweat on them, um, they lose a lot of water through sweating on the trailer. Sometimes it just dries before you see it. But that is one thing whenever you're traveling, assume that they're going to get to your destination already mildly dehydrated, but significantly dehydrated in terms of performance. So anything you can do to help kind of preload the horse with fluid and water leading up to travel, and then keeping them, hydrated, drinking water throughout the tournament is going to help you get more performance out of the horse and minimize the chance of something like a colic while you're traveling. So, in addition to water, what kind of goes with that is electrolytes. All horses should have free choice salt available. A lot of people do salt blocks or like um, salt bricks. Those work fairly well. A lot of horses aren't going to get enough salt off of them because horses' tongues are quite smooth and those blocks are quite hard. They're really designed for cattle tongues, which are really rough. So there's some horses that will sit there and lick long enough that they will get enough salt to meet their daily requirement, but a lot of horses aren't willing to just sit there and lick and lick and lick. So some other options for you, you can put 2 ounces of loose white salt in their feed so that you know that they're consuming it, or you can put out a pan of loose salt and just let them consume it. The only mineral that horses consume to meet their needs is sodium, which is part of salt. And so, as long as they have free choice salt that they can get to, they're going to meet their sodium needs. The other part of salt is chloride, and that's another electrolyte. Horses typically get plenty of chloride from their forage, so that's one that we're not so worried about supplementing. Other electrolytes that are important are things like magnesium and calcium. All of these are tied to how the horse's body functions, like at a cellular level, how their muscles work, how their muscles contract, how fluids move between membranes within the organs, and it's all really super critical. So the horse needs enough electrolytes, and their electrolyte needs are going to change when they're in heavy work and when they're sweating. Here in the Southeast, in the summer, they're going to sweat just standing in the pasture. So their requirements for all of those electrolytes are going to be higher. When you're performing and traveling, they're sweating more and their electrolyte requirements are going to be higher also. For horses that have kind of heavier muscling, you think about like your quarter horses, or if folks are riding draft cross type things, they're going to have a higher need for calcium. So all of those are really important. So adding electrolytes whenever the horse is sweating on top of their 2 ounces of free or free choice salt is going to be helpful for you. There's a ton of electrolyte products available on the market. I like to reach for apple a day. It's usually the cheapest one on the shelf, which is also nice. It has one of the higher levels of calcium, so that works well for those heavier muscled horses. Um, and it does not have sugar added to it. So in humans, there's research that if you give electrolytes with dextrose or sugar, that the body is going to utilize them more effectively. And they have found that to a certain degree in horses, but not as much as in humans. And horses have enough quote unquote sugar in their diet, whether it's in their grass or hay or their feed, that they're going to get the benefits of that without actually putting sugar in the electrolytes that you're feeding. So you can save that space in the electrolyte bucket. Instead of getting one with sugar, get one without.
Christina, can I
Let's
ask you
see.
a question about salt?
Yeah,
So I've seen a lot of people talk about salt, and I know there's obviously the Redmond salt is one of the ones that some people use, and then there's also just like regular salt that you can use. What
right.
what what is like the biggest difference between the two, and what is your general input on that.
Yeah, that is a great question. So, really, at the end of the day, all horses need is plain white salt because what we're after is the sodium and chloride, specifically the sodium. Um, and table salt, plain livestock salt, like you can get in a 50-pound bag at the feed store, that's going to cover what they need. The products like the Redmond salt or the Himalayan salt blocks, these kind of designer salts, they market themselves as being a source of other minerals. And there are other minerals in there, but they're there in such tiny amounts that if you look at like the course of a horse's diet, they're really not making any meaningful contribution to it. Um, that being said, some horses will eat those salts way better than plain salt. Like my mom has a gelding who doesn't really lick a plain white salt block, but if you hang one of those Himalayan salt licks, he'll lick that. So that has value for him. If he's not going to eat salt on a salt block, well, it doesn't help him because horse diets can be perfect on paper, and if you put them in front of them and they don't eat it, it's not going to do a whole lot of good. So that's where the kind of designer salts may have some extra value for a horse who just doesn't want to lick a plain white salt lick, or maybe doesn't want to eat plain white salt in their feed. There's a couple other things you can try with them, like you could try a flavored electrolyte, or there's some companies that make electrolyte pellets. I know Smart Pack does one. Um, Cargill makes like an encapsulated salt. So they take the salt and it has like a mist of, I think it's palm oil. They may have changed the formula, but something to make it a little more palatable.
And how much in
Usually,
general for just a scoop, like regular salt, do you
yep,
recommend for like 1,000-pound horse or 12?
it's 2 ounces per day is their baseline, and then more when they're sweating.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank
And that's important. So we talk about sodium being the main thing that we want from the salt. The horse's thirst reflex is all based on sodium. So their blood sodium concentration is what trips like a little signal in their brain that says that they should drink. And horses, there's several ways that horses are poorly designed. Their thirst reflex is one of them. So when humans sweat, our sweat is saltier than our blood. And so the more we sweat, the less salty our blood is, and that trigger gets flipped relatively quickly. Um, Same thing for some other mammals, but with horses, their sweat composition matches their blood in terms of saltiness. And so it takes a lot longer for that thirst switch to get kicked on. So that's not ideal because they're kind of already behind the eight ball by the time their brain actually says, hey, we should go drink some water. The other thing that's not great about the system is that as soon as water passes the back of the tongue, that switch gets flipped back off again. And it's probably a survival mechanism in that if they are moving across the plains and they stop to get a drink of water at a pond and they're so busy thinking about drinking enough, they might miss the mountain lion coming up behind them to eat them. And so for prey animals, it seems that that might be why their thirst reflex is turned off so quickly. So keeping horses hydrated is actually quite hard work. Um, so that's what we're after with the sodium. The only thing that's going to make them drink is sodium. So there's some tricks we can do for horses to try and increase the sodium level in their diet to trip that little reflex to drink and make them feel thirsty. One of the things you can use is baking soda. So that's sodium bicarb. It doesn't have the chloride part like table salt does. So the horse still needs electrolytes, not just the sodium. But if you're trying to encourage them to drink and like kind of tank up leading up to a trailering event or something, you can give them a couple tablespoons of baking soda in their meals each day leading up to it. And that'll hopefully encourage them to drink by making that signal for drink, um, but not having the chloride signal to pee it back out again. Anybody else have questions about electrolytes or salt? I could talk for hours just on electrolytes. They're pretty interesting and they're really important to horses. Um, I guess one thing I'll add, because I do get questions about it where people reach out to me and they've got a horse who maybe doesn't have as much pep in their step as they would like. And they ask me about like adding more carbs to the diet, adding more starch. The majority of the time, when I look at those diets, the horse actually needs electrolytes, and the performance improves when the electrolyte um, stuff is addressed. So that's something to think about. If you have a horse who you feel like, on paper, it has a good diet and you're kind of checking all the boxes from a fitness standpoint, but you're still missing that performance, kind of little bit more performance. Sometimes looking at your electrolyte protocol can be helpful for that. Um, and the nice thing is there's been quite a lot of research on electrolytes in horses at the Summer Games in Atlanta. They did a ton of research. And so we have that information, and then the endurance world continues to do research on them. And so we get new stuff out almost yearly from them about, the best way of doing stuff to keep horses happy and healthy and performing well. All right, so the base of every horse's diet is the forage. And that's where I like to start when I'm talking to people. I want to know more about, what is making up the biggest part of the horse's diet. So forage is going to count grass, hay, forage replacer type products like, hay cubes, hay pellets, complete feeds, beet pulp, soy hulls. All of those count in the forage category. Most horses need around 2% of their ideal body weight daily. At a very minimum, they need between 1.25% and 1.5% of their ideal body weight daily. At the upper end, we've got horses that might need something more on the realm of 2.5% to 3% of ideal body weight daily. So if you're talking about a 1,000-pound horse, 2% of 1,000 pounds is 20 pounds. So your horse, if you have, like, say you have kind of a smaller built thoroughbred, a smaller bodied quarter horse, an Australian stock horse, you're looking at something in the realm of 20 to 25 pounds of grass and hay daily. When you're talking about it, the right amount is very important. So are they getting enough? Are they getting too little, too much? But also, are they getting the right type of forage? So these two horses on here have pretty different needs. The liver chestnut horse is almost 30 and has teeth, but they're compromised. And then the horse with the snow is 9, and she's part pony, and her calorie needs are very different than, say, the thoroughbred, who's going to get the really, really nice hay and as much as she wants. And this girl here, this bay girl, she's going to need a lot less calories than she does. So thinking about what type of forage are you feeding, what is available to you is also very important. So there's no point saying, I'm going to feed this horse. Like, for example, I really like brome hay. It's not something that's readily available in my neck of the woods. So it doesn't really make sense for me to decide that that's going to be the base of my diet, because I really can't procure enough of it that I can feed it as the base diet. I'd probably run out of it. However, it does make sense, for the German riding pony, I buy her hay from just up the road. Easy to access. I have a good relationship with the farmer. I don't really have to worry about that. And then for the thoroughbred, I buy it from a feed store that reliably has that hay in stock all winter long. So those are all important things to consider. The one other thing that you should consider is, what can you afford? If you pick out a hay that is outside of your budget and you find that you have to limit how much hay you're feeding so that you can stay within your budget, that's not ideal for the horse. You'd be better off finding a cheaper hay that you can feed enough of, and still meet their needs. Obviously, that's still important. So there's options for supplementing the forage. When the grass is poor because there's a drought, we almost always have a drought in my part of the world in the summer. This is the first year in a long time that we haven't. So when the grass is poor because of drought, or because it's overgrazed because you've got a lot of horses in a small area, or when the grass goes dormant in the winter. We live just a couple miles from Southern Pines, but we're over the the border into the Piedmont, but in Southern Pines, the Bermuda grass stops growing when the evening temperatures go below 60. So it doesn't grow once you get to that. And this year, that's quite early. And it's not going to start growing again in the spring until like the end of April. So you've got a pretty long time when the grass is dormant. And then in my neck of the woods, we have fescue, and we only really have about a month that it's not producing well. So when the grass is poor or dormant, maybe you're going to supplement with hay. And then if you have instances where hay is scarce because it was a bad hay year, or perhaps the only hay that's available is quite poor. This is something that I feel like everybody says basically every year that it's a bad hay year. Sometimes it's because it rained too much. Sometimes it's because it rained too little. So it just depends on your area and where you're getting hay from also. But when hay is scarce or it's poor quality, you can add in hay replacement to help improve the quality of your hay. So say say in our area, we didn't get our usual number of cuttings of hay, and the hay that is available is quite stemmy and stocky and not as nutrient or calorie dense as we're expecting. I could say, well, okay, so for my ones who need more calories, they're going to get a portion of the poor quality hay. And then in addition to that, I'm going to feed them maybe between 5 and 10 pounds of a forage replacer. So something like an alfalfa cube or a hay pellet or a chopped forage. And that's a way that you can improve the overall quality of the forage that you're offering without, having to maybe import hay from another region. The other reason that you might want to supplement the forage is for horses with dentition issues. So for the older horses, but also sometimes younger horses have teeth issues. After they get to a certain age, even if they physically have teeth, there's not a sharp cutting, grinding surface to the molars anymore. And the only place in the horse's GI tract that they can effectively shorten the length of the fibers is in their mouth at the teeth. And so if the teeth aren't functional like they need to be, there's no other opportunity through the GI tract for the horse to be able to digest that properly. So while there's some value to the horses who can't chew and get the nutrition they need out of the hay, and that they're staying busy, there's some like enrichment going on. Like for this horse who's almost 30, she'll go out and she'll eat, but she's not able to extract what she needs from the feed. So she gets a portion of her nutrients and calorie and forage provided with a complete feed and a hay pellet. There's a lot of options for those, and it's kind of like when you're picking the hay, you want to pick your forage replacement in a similar manner. So you want to pick like the right type of hay. Is an alfalfa cube appropriate? Is a teff pellet appropriate? I try and keep the longest stem of fiber possible for as long as possible for horses. And so kind of on the one end of the spectrum, you've got grass and hay, which are the longest stem forage. And then you've got like the chopped forages. Like you can see on this picture, there's a couple chopped forages, the Safe Starch and Stress Free and the Diamond Smart. So that's your next fiber length. That's about an inch, maybe an inch and a half. And then the next one, as you go shorter, is a hay cube, and those are like 1/2 inch fiber length. And then in a pellet, it's a very small fiber length, and it's a ground hay product. So as their teeth deteriorate or as their needs change, you can kind of work your way down. And after they get above the age of like 25, 26, most of the equine vet dental specialists that I've talked to and have given presentations on this, they really want them on a hay pellet and a complete feed. They don't even really want them on the cubes, because what ends up happening is, one, they're not able to grind the fiber length of the cube so that they can utilize it further down their GI tract. And then the other thing is that as the horse's teeth age and the roots get shorter, they get to have a little bit of movement to them when they're chewing and grinding, and they pack food in between the teeth. And so the vets will call that a diastema. And that food will get rotten and they'll get gum disease. And then the teeth have a chance to kind of like start getting rotten. Sometimes they crack. So this horse that's in the picture, she was getting chopped forage, and then we got to the point where that was no longer good for her. And the dental specialist vet really just wanted her on the shortest possible hay. So she gets a hay pellet now.
Christina, Mary wanted to ask something. Mary, do you want to ask the question or do you want me to read it out loud?
I was just gonna ask, I have a 27-year-old horse and he's on senior feed and holds his weight fine and he still tries to eat hay. Sometimes he eats it, sometimes he doesn't. Does so are you saying that the senior feed being a complete feed isn't enough forage? They still need another hay pellet or of some sort added to
Yeah.
that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's all I was saying. I was done.
Okay. It depends on the horse. The senior feed counts towards their daily requirement of forage. And, for some horses that are eating higher levels of a senior feed, it could be that you are providing enough just with the senior feed alone. For one who's an easier keeper and maybe doesn't need as much senior feed, um, sometimes those ones benefit from having a hay pellet added in. But if they're keeping a good body condition score, um, I think that that's a really good indication as to whether they're getting enough from the diet that they're providing. And a lot of what I kind of do with senior horses when we're looking at them is it we keep them on whatever they're doing well on until they're not doing well anymore. And then we'll try something else. So we kind of let their body guide us. And so if he's looking really good with what you're doing now, I would stick with it. And then at some point, if you get to the point where you're like, oh, he no longer looks as good as he used to on what I'm giving him, then that might be a time that it makes sense to introduce like a soaked hay pellet or a cube into his diet.
He also has cushions, which might mask the fact that he's not doing as well as he looks. I was just wondering if there's something I should be looking for to make sure that he's getting sufficient um, nutrition.
Yeah. So usually Cushing's does the opposite and it makes them look worse than the diet that you're providing. If they're appropriately medicated, that can help mitigate that. But I would say if he's cushionic and he looks good with what you're doing, then I would say that that is fine. The one thing to keep in mind is well, it's going to be different for every feed, but take Triple Crown Senior, for example. All of our feeds, not balancers, have a minimum feeding rate of about 5 pounds per day for like the average size, 1,000-pound horse. So if you have a horse where they are staying at a good body condition score and they're only getting, say, 2 pounds of senior feed, it would benefit them to add in a little bit of balancer because that's going to make up those vitamins and minerals that they're missing by eating less than the minimum feeding rate. Um, and you'll always want to check your bag for that because different feeds vary quite a bit. Like there's another senior feed that's very common that a lot of people use, and it has a minimum feeding rate of like 8 pounds per day. And so if a horse isn't eating 8 pounds, then they're going to need to get those vitamins and minerals from somewhere else. Do you have any other questions about forage and like supplementing forage, aged horses or not?
How would you measure how much you think your horses are getting from grazing?
Oh, that's a great question. So, Dr. Siciliano at NC State, he has done a ton of research on that, and he has a calculator that you can use um, based on how many hours your horse is out and how tall the grass is and how healthy the pasture is. So that's kind of neat. If you want to go that route, you can certainly do that. Um, and it's online. I feel like probably if you Google Dr. Siciliano NC State pasture consumption or something, it'll probably
I'll see
come
if I
right
can
up.
find it and put it in the chat.
Uh-huh. Um, the other thing is that you can just take like an educated guess. So if you have a horse who's out on pasture 24/7 and they look good, they're probably getting enough just, quantity of forage. I can usually look at a pasture and say, like, yes, that's likely providing enough for that horse or for those 10 horses or whatever. And I can also look at pastures and be like, well, even if you would really like it to be providing enough, it's probably not because I can't see very much grass and the horses are in poor condition. So you can make some pretty educated guesses just on that. But if you really wanted, you could use Dr. Siciliano's calculator. The other thing you can do is talk to your extension office. So that's a resource that your tax dollars go to, and those folks are really educated, typically really educated, especially in pastures. You don't always get an equine specialist in every county, but they're usually all really good with pastures because that's so important for production livestock. And they will have like special measuring rulers. They'll come out and they can advise you on all of that, and then they can also advise you on how to amend your pasture to make it more healthy or how to make it specifically good for your horses, maybe like not too high in sugar or whatever the case is for your specific
Our
needs.
extension office allows you to bring soil samples and they will tell you what you need to
Yeah.
add, such as fertilizer or lime to get the best grass out of it.
Yeah, I really encourage people to take advantage of that resource. You're paying for it anyways. You may as well you may as well utilize it. And they tend to be really educated people. They enjoy helping. And I'm sure they're like me and they would rather do that part of the job than like paperwork. So take advantage of that knowledge that's available to you. And yeah, a lot of places, if you're outside of like the row crop season, start of the season, they'll actually do your soil samples for free a lot of the time. The only time we have to pay for them is if you take them in, I think it's like February, March, because that's when all the farmers are trying to get their stuff taken care of. So that's a great resource, and I really encourage people to talk to them. They can also test your hay and tell you exactly what's in your hay. So yeah, really good stuff there. I love extension agents, and I really encourage people to utilize them.
Our extension had a seminar on hay that I went to, and they basically said that if you have really good hay and good pasture, then you should only have to feed to supplement what they're missing from what they're getting from their hay.
Right, yeah, and I think that's our next slide that we're going to talk about here too. So here we go. So filling the gap. So all forages are missing some nutrients. It's pretty safe to assume that your forages are going to be deficient in copper, zinc, magnesium, and lysine. So copper, zinc, and magnesium are minerals, and then lysine is an essential amino acid. And amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and every living creature needs these. It's an essential amino acid because the horse's body cannot make it. There's several essential amino acids, but lysine is the most common one that's missing. And basically, if they're missing the essential amino acids, they can't build any proteins. So it's important that they get those. Most forages are not going to provide enough lysine for like a performance horse or a broodmare or a growing horse. And then some forages aren't going to provide enough protein or calories. That's not uncommon in my part of the world where, for example, like we grow a fair bit of coastal Bermuda hay in this area, and it can be quite low in protein. And then depending on the quality of the hay, it might be too low in protein. The other thing that you find is as hay gets more mature and more stemmy, it's harder for the horse to digest it, and it's harder for the horse to get the nutrients out of the like the stems and everything. So that's something to keep in mind. A softer hay is going to be easier to digest and pull nutrients out of, and a physically harder, scratchier hay is going to be harder to digest. And then some forages aren't going to provide enough calories for your horse in particular, or they may not provide enough calories for any horse, just depending on the quality of them. So you can use that to your advantage. Like the easy keepers can have a lower calorie hay. The harder keepers can have a higher calorie hay. It can be difficult when they're all in the same pasture together. So I'm lucky in that my easy keepers and my hard keepers are separated, so I can feed two different hays that meet their needs. But I certainly work with clients who, have an older hard keeper thoroughbred who's turned out with a young, healthy, gaited horse. And that's a really hard problem to solve if they're out 24/7 together, and the owner doesn't have a way of separating them for them to eat meals or for a couple hours so that we can supplement the hay. In a perfect world, we'd have pasture separated out by, that exactly. But in reality, we have pasture separated by, kind of arbitrary boarding barn stuff or who gets along with who so that there's the least amount of drama. So that's something to consider when we're talking about filling the gaps, and that we're going to feed, say we're going to feed 20 pounds of the hay that's available. What is that hay not providing? And that's where the feed portion of the diet comes in. So if you're like, talking in a lecture, it would be feed is called the concentrate. And it's because it's a small volume that's fed that's going to provide a lot. A balancer or a feed is going to provide the nutrients that are missing for your forage specifically, and then for your horse's needs specifically. And there's some examples of things down there that you might look at. Fortified, the Smart Cube and Smart Pellet are a fortified hay product, so it has vitamins and minerals added to a hay. And then like the Perform feed is a performance feed that has a significant amount of calories and then also protein, vitamins, and minerals added to it, and kind of similar with Senior. And then the little balancer bucket is going to provide a lot of vitamins, minerals, and essential amino acids in a very small package that isn't going to provide a lot of calories for those easier keeper types. Okay, so what does a sport horse need specifically? I think it's really important, and I'm making a point of talking about it with kind of every talk that I do, of really covering the basics, because the more I'm out here talking to people, the more I realize that people are really interested in nutrition. They want to do the right things right for their horse. But backing up and starting with the basics is really going to solve the vast majority of their problems. So, I have a lot of people, our company specializes in gut health and performance and, solving problems like horses with insulin dysregulation or Cushing's. But at the end of the day, I spend most of my time making sure that the basics are correct versus worrying about like adding in fancy nutraceutical supplements or something like that. So we've covered the basics. Let's talk about sport horses in particular. They still need all of those basics, so that's important. They're also going to need a high quality protein source to rebuild their muscles. So that's going to provide, when we talk about a high quality protein, it's going to have a lot of the limiting amino acids, the ones that the horses can't make themselves. In most horse feeds, that's going to come from soybean meal, because the amino acid breakdown of soy is actually basically identical to what the horse's needs are on the amino acid side. So it's a really useful, good product to put into horse feeds because it provides what they need in the right ratios. There are definitely horses that have soy sensitivities. It's a relatively small percent. I don't know what it is, if it's like 5% or 3% of horses, but some horses don't tolerate soy well. And for them, we've got other products that are available that don't have soy, and they have kind of novel sources of protein. Sport horses are going to need a little higher antioxidant levels. So antioxidants are things that are going to help keep the horse's tissues and cells and stuff healthy as they burn through nutrients and have waste products. So some of the ones that you've heard of are things like vitamin E and selenium. So making sure that horses are getting enough of those so that as their muscles are working hard and as they're digesting like their higher fats foods, that they have enough of those antioxidants supplied to keep their bodies healthy. Higher calorie needs, maybe. There's certainly sport horses that do have really high calorie needs. And then I also have a lot of sport horses that I work with who are competing at quite high levels, and they eat balancer. So they're getting maybe 2 pounds of balancer or a pound of balancer in addition to their forage. Same thing for carbs. There's performance horses that get a higher carb load than, say, a pleasure horse. But that's also a big maybe, because I've got horses running barrels and race horses and polo cross horses who are eating something like Senior Gold, which is a very low carb feed. And they're just getting the carbs that they need from the forage that is offered to them. And then just emphasizing again that electrolytes are important. And if everything is looking good on the diet on paper, but the horse isn't performing quite as you would expect, that electrolytes is something that we should look through and make sure that it is meeting all of its needs there. Okay, and then we want to talk about your horse specifically. So not all performance horses need performance feed. And this is that going back to the basics like I was talking about. So if you have a performance horse and you buy it performance feed because that makes sense, and then your horse is only eating like a cup per day or maybe a pound per day, they're going to be missing out on a significant number of vitamins and minerals and amino acids that their body needs to rebuild tissues and grow their muscles and get faster and stronger and better. So those performance horses would do better getting a pound of balancer than they would do getting a pound of performance feed. And then, of course, you want to balance the diet off of your forage. So depending on what you're feeding specifically, if you're feeding a really, really high calorie, high quality, maybe you're feeding like a second cutting orchard with some alfalfa, and you're feeding it free choice and the horse is eating 30 pounds a day, they may not need 5 or 10 pounds of a performance feed because they're already getting so many calories and nutrients from the hay. But if you're feeding, say, like a first cutting fescue hay, like we get around here locally, that hay is, you're typically going to have to feed something that's got some extra calories and protein to it, for a sport horse. So if you look at the main horses on the pictures here, you've got some really nice E grade horses down at the bottom. And you can probably imagine that their needs are going to be a little bit different than the horse in the top picture, right? So they're a different type of horse. They have a different job, and they're going to need a diet that's tailored to them.
I have a question.
Yes.
So what if you have a horse like mine who only likes grass?
Well, you're gonna have to feed them grass,
But
but when you
well,
go
they
to
do. She does eat grass, and I try to feed her other things, but a lot of times she just eats nothing else. She will not
um,
eat feed.
yeah, she
We're
won't
kind
eat
of in the
feed.
same boat, Mary. I can sympathize with that.
Yeah. So, in general, for me, I go into it assuming that horses should like to eat. And if horses don't like to eat, I start going down the rabbit hole of why they don't like to eat. And there's a great many reasons for that. If you ask Facebook, it's ulcers because that's the answer to everything. And it's kind of not wrong. Like ulcers is often the answer when a horse doesn't want to eat.
Well, mine has been scoped for
Oh,
ulcers, and
good.
she doesn't have them. She's had her teeth done,
Awesome.
and on every 6 months, and there's nothing wrong with her teeth. She
Uh-huh.
just prefers not to eat feed.
Yeah.
She would.
So there's other things that can bother them throughout their GI tract. I think it's not unreasonable to assume that some horses have food sensitivities. Kind of maybe it's an allergy or maybe it's just a sensitivity, and they've learned that feed makes them feel bad. So that's a possibility. I'd say it's probably a small possibility, but it's definitely a possibility. Um, the other thing is, even if they don't have ulcers, they can have other disruptions to their GI tract. It could be something like they have, hindgut issues. So, not thinking about the stomach or the small intestine, but thinking about their colon and their cecum and kind of the big fermentation vat that's at the end of their GI tract. If they're having some issues back there because their microbiome is not balanced or because they've got some inflammation issues due to stress or heat stress or medication use or something like that, that can put them off feed. But that's usually something that it's kind of like we play 20 questions and we ask a bunch of questions. And sometimes we can figure out what it is and then be able to address it. And then I'm sure that there is, you know, there's some horses out there because horses refuse to read the textbook and they just don't like feed, the end. But in general, I would say whatever it is, 99.9% of the time, horses should like eating feed. Um, so we want to kind of figure out why exactly that is. And like I said, it's a game of 20 or maybe 50 questions going through all the different things to try and figure out why that's the case. But yeah, that would definitely be, since we only have 6 minutes left, that would be a separate conversation of playing 20 questions, which I'm happy to do with you.
Okay.
And then when we're talking about your horse's diet specifically, like I said, you want to choose something that's readily available for your forage, but also for your feed. So, finding something that's available locally that your feed store keeps in stock, because it's really not helpful to you if you pick out, whatever feed you decide that you like and you make this beautiful diet on paper, but the feed store doesn't keep it in stock, or it runs out all the time, or you decide you're going to order it online and the shipment's always late, or you buy a brand that comes from overseas and the shipping container never arrives, or the company stops shipping things to the US, which is a new problem that we haven't had previously, but is a real concern right now, is that some countries and some companies just straight up aren't shipping things to the United States. So finding something that is readily available to you, and that you can afford to feed an appropriate amount of, is also very important. And kind of on the note of cost, most of the time, the cheapest feed is also going to be, I've got a typo here, will be the most expensive thing to feed, which seems a little counterintuitive. But I find that time and time again, people will buy off of the price per bag and not look at the price per day for you to be able to feed that. So either they end up feeding a lot of the feed and it ends up costing more money because of that, or they feed the feed and it's missing things, so they have to buy supplements. And then by the time you add in the supplements, you're spending way more than if you would have just bought a feed that had everything already included. So that's something that like your extension agent can help you with, or somebody like me can help you with, is calculating this cost per day, as well as analyzing the diet itself and making sure that it's providing everything you need, and also, making sense on the budget side of things, because whether we like it or not, that's a very important thing. Okay, so that ties into this. So what's next? Working with a pro is always a good idea. There's nutrition specialists who are independent or who work for feed companies. Generally, if it's somebody who works for a feed company, it's not going to come at a cost to you. It's a service that the feed company provides. So like for me, for example, Triple Crown make sure that I have all the information that I need, and they send me to continuing education so that I can share that information with my customers. And part of my job is to help Triple Crown customers or potential customers put together their diets. Extension agents, like I said, really great resource to you. There are independent PhD nutritionists. Those are usually have a fee for consultation, but I would say it's well worth the fee that they charge you, because typically they'll save you that much money in just like maybe 2 or 3 months, and they can have a lot of information for you. There's also PhDs associated with the feed companies who are available to you. So those are all resources that are available to you, and I encourage you to utilize them because they can be super helpful, both for the performance of your horse and also for your wallet. And on that note, there's the contact information. You're welcome to reach out to me, even if I'm not your rep. I can put you in contact with your rep, or I can answer your questions for you. And then again, Stacy, who's our customer service kind of lead person at the office, is just a wealth of information, and she's wonderful. I cannot say enough good things about her. You can reach her at info@triplecrownfeed.com, or if you call the 800 number on our website or on our feed bags. If you want to reach out to us via social media, that gives you Jessica Drexler. She's also wonderful and also a wealth of information. I know we only have 2 minutes left on the Zooms, and it ends at the time. It doesn't just keep ticking. So if you have more questions, you're welcome to reach out to me, or you can send them to Lisa and she can get them to me, and I'm happy to answer them in detail.
Go ahead and stop the recording.